You already know what you need to do. It is not a mystery. It is not hidden somewhere you have not looked yet. The task is there. It has been there. The goal is visible. The path is clear. And yet, hours pass. Days slip by, and the thing that matters most stays untouched, while everything that does not matter fills the time. This is not a conversation about laziness. Lazy people do not feel the weight of what they are not doing, but you feel it, you carry it. You think about it while doing something else. And the awareness that you should be working on it makes the avoidance even more exhausting than the work itself would have been. So what is actually happening? And more importantly, what do you do about it? Here is the truth that most productivity advice refuses to say clearly. The problem is not your motivation. Motivation is not the engine. Motivation is the feeling that comes after the engine is already running. What you are missing is not inspiration. What you are missing is the willingness to move before you feel like it. The Stoics understood this with a clarity that no motivational video has ever improved on. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled an empire, managed wars, faced plague and betrayal and grief, still wrote reminders to himself every morning. Reminders to get up, reminders to act, reminders that time once spent is never returned. He wrote them not because he was weak, but because he knew the mind's tendency toward drift and delay. He knew it as intimately as anyone who has ever lived. Today we are going to walk through the Stoic framework for forcing yourself into action, not by waiting for motivation, not by building the perfect system, but by understanding what procrastination actually is, where it comes from, and how to break through it with the discipline the Stoics practiced every single day. Welcome to Master Your Mind, the place where ancient philosophy becomes practical mental strength. Let us begin. Part 1. What procrastination actually is. We have been taught to see procrastination as a productivity problem, a time management failure, a discipline deficit. But that diagnosis is wrong. Or at least it is not deep enough. And when you treat a symptom as if it were the cause, every solution you apply misses the actual root. Procrastination is not primarily about tasks. It is about emotion. Specifically, it is the mind's attempt to avoid the discomfort it anticipates from engaging with something that matters, not the task itself. The anticipation of what the task might feel like, the potential for judgment, the risk of failure, the exposure of effort that might not be good enough, the vulnerability of trying at something you actually care about. Here is the part that most people miss entirely. The more something matters to you, the more you are at risk of avoiding it. That is not weakness. That is a mechanism. The mind protects what it values by keeping it safe from the possibility of failure. And the most efficient way to protect something from failure is to never attempt it at all. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it, and it is in your power to wipe out that judgment." He was describing the exact mechanism behind procrastination 2,000 years before behavioral psychology gave it a name. It is not the task that is daunting. It is the story you have constructed around the task. The silent conviction that the gap between who you are and who the task requires you to be is too wide to cross. And the longer you stay away from the task, the larger it grows in your imagination. Every day you defer, the task becomes heavier. Heavier with guilt, heavier with accumulated dread, heavier with the slow erosion of self-belief that happens when you keep making promises to yourself that you do not keep. The avoidance itself is creating the mountain. The first step, before any technique, before any system, is to see this clearly. To look at the thing you are avoiding and say, I am not staying away from this because it is too hard. I am staying away because of a story I am telling myself about what it will feel like to face it. And stories can be rewritten. The Stoics called this practice of examining your own judgments prosophy, self-attention, the discipline of watching your own thinking with enough distance to question it, rather than simply obey it. When you notice that you are telling yourself this is too much, or I am not ready, or this will go wrong, That is not information about the task. That is the avoidance mechanism engaging. And engagement, not retreat, is the only thing that disengages it. Part 2. Why motivation cannot come first. Here is the belief that keeps more people stuck than almost anything else. I will start when I feel motivated. It sounds reasonable, sensible even. Why force yourself into something when you do not feel like it? Would it not be better to wait until the energy is there, until the conditions are right, until inspiration arrives and carries you forward naturally? No. And the reason is not philosophical. It is neurological. Motivation is a response to action, not a prerequisite for it. When you begin doing something, even reluctantly, even imperfectly, even for just 5 minutes, your brain starts to engage. The mental friction decreases. The task becomes real instead of imagined. And that sense of forward movement, that is what motivation actually feels like. But it only comes after you start, not before, never before. The feeling you are waiting for is generated by the very thing you are refusing to do until you feel it. You are waiting for a fire that only your action can light. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." This is one of the most misunderstood lines in all of Stoic philosophy. It is not saying obstacles magically turn into opportunities. It is saying that the act of moving through what stands in your way is itself what builds the capacity to keep moving. The action is the transformation, not the result. The act itself. Think about the moments in your life where you did something before you felt ready. You made the call before you felt confident. You started the project before you felt prepared. You had the conversation before you felt certain about the outcome. And at some point during or after the doing, the feeling followed. Not before, after. The Stoics practiced this under the concept of kathekon, appropriate action. Action taken not because conditions are perfect, but because it is aligned with who you have chosen to be. The feeling is irrelevant. The commitment is not. The discipline then is not about becoming someone who always feels motivated. It is about becoming someone who acts whether they feel motivated or not. That is the gap between the person who intends and the person who does. Not talent, not resources, not luck. The willingness to begin in the absence of the feeling that makes beginning comfortable. Part 3. The Stoic Tools for Forcing Action. Tool 1. The 5-minute commitment. Marcus Aurelius wrote of doing what lies in front of you with precise and genuine effort. Not the whole task, not the entire vision, but the thing that is directly before you, right now, handled with complete attention. The modern application of this is simple. You do not tell yourself you are going to complete the project. You do not tell yourself you are going to work for 2 hours. You make one non-negotiable agreement. For 5 minutes, I engage fully, with no exit and no distraction. The reason this works is not trickery. It is about lowering the threshold of beginning to the point where resistance cannot justify refusal. 5 minutes is not a threat. Your mind cannot construct a catastrophic narrative around 5 minutes. And once you begin, something crucial happens. The imagined version of the task, the one you have been dreading, dissolves on contact with the actual doing. What remains is just work, and work you can handle. There is also a psychological mechanism at play. Once you have started something, your brain registers it as incomplete, and incomplete tasks maintain an active pull on your attention. They want to be finished. The tension of incompleteness becomes a motivating force, but only after you have started. The hardest part is always and only the beginning. So the rule is this: never negotiate with the beginning. Do not ask yourself if you feel like it. Do not check whether conditions are ideal. Simply initiate. 5 minutes. Full presence. No exceptions. That is the entire practice. And 90% of the time, 5 minutes becomes 20. 20 becomes an hour. An hour becomes the work actually done. Tool 2. Divide until it cannot be refused. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." Part of what makes that waste so pervasive is the way we frame our tasks. Write report on a to-do list is not a task. It is a destination with no map. And destinations without maps produce exactly the kind of vague dread that keeps us scrolling instead of working. The Stoic practice of focusing only on what is immediately within your control applies directly here. You cannot control whether the work will be brilliant. You cannot control how it will be received. You cannot control the outcome. What you can control is the next single step, and only that. So you divide. You divide until you reach something so specific, so small, so obviously doable that refusal becomes absurd. Not write the report. Write the first sentence of the introduction. Not build the business. Make one phone call today. Not fix the relationship. Say one honest thing tonight. Each small completion does two things simultaneously. It creates visible progress, which builds the self-confidence that erodes avoidance, and it generates momentum. The compound interest of small actions taken consistently, day after day. Marcus Aurelius did not try to solve the empire in a day. He wrote about the single day in front of him, the single duty, the one thing he could do well, with complete attention, right now. Divide the mountain until you are holding a handful of dirt. Then move the dirt. Then the next handful. The mountain moves. It always moves, but only when you stop staring at the whole of it and start handling what is directly in front of you. Tool 3. Use time as a weapon. Seneca's most famous work is a letter titled On the Shortness of Life. And its central argument is not that life is short. It is that life only feels short because we waste the enormous portion of it that is actually given to us. He observed that people protect their money with vigilance. They guard their property. They argue over possessions, but they freely hand their time to anyone who asks for it, and watch it evaporate into distraction without a moment of resistance. Here is the practice. Use the awareness of time not as anxiety, but as fuel. Not the frantic, scarcity-driven panic of "I am running out of time," but the clean, clarifying awareness that this moment will not return. This hour is being spent whether you spend it on what matters or not. The question is only how it is spent. Before you allow yourself to avoid the work, ask one question. If this were the last productive hour I had, would I spend it on this? Not dramatically, practically. The answer clarifies immediately, and that clarity cuts through the fog of procrastination faster than any system or strategy ever will. The Stoics practiced a daily exercise called memento mori, the deliberate awareness of mortality, not as morbid fixation, as a tool for presence. When you remember that time is genuinely finite, not abstractly, but concretely, irreversibly finite, the question of whether you feel like doing something becomes almost absurd. The question becomes, what deserves the hours I actually have? Tool 4. Premeditate the obstacle. One of the most powerful and least discussed Stoic practices is premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of difficulties. Before you begin a task, before you enter a day, you deliberately imagine what will get in the way. What will the resistance feel like? When will the urge to stop arise? What will your mind tell you to justify the avoidance? This is not pessimism. This is preparation. A general who plans only for ideal conditions will be destroyed the moment conditions change. A general who has war-gamed every possible difficulty before battle has already responded, in the mind, to whatever arises. The response is practiced. The decision was made in advance. There is no moment of crisis, only the execution of a plan that was already formed, applied to action. Before you begin, sit with this question. What will I use as a reason to stop? At what point will I tell myself I have done enough? Or that today is a bad day for it? Or that I will be better positioned to continue tomorrow? Then make the decision in advance. When that moment arrives, and it will, I will recognize it as the avoidance mechanism engaging, not as information about the task, and I will not stop. The decision not to stop is made before the work begins, not in the heat of the moment when every excuse feels legitimate, in the clear, rational calm of preparation. This is how the Stoics separated emotional reactions from deliberate choices. They did not trust themselves to make the right decision in the moment. They made it in advance and trusted the advanced decision. Tool 5. Reward through recognition, not indulgence. The Stoics did not oppose pleasure. They opposed dependence on pleasure as a condition for right action. The distinction matters enormously. You do not need a reward to act. Action is its own reward, in the sense that living according to your values, honoring your commitments, and doing what you said you would do produces a quiet satisfaction that external reward cannot replicate or substitute. Marcus Aurelius wrote of the satisfaction that comes from acting according to one's principles, not the applause, not the recognition from others, but the internal coherence of having been who you decided to be. That is the reward, and it compounds. Every time you act when you did not feel like it, you build a self-image of someone who can be trusted, someone whose word to themselves means something, and that self-image becomes the fuel for the next act of discipline. This does not mean you cannot rest, enjoy recovery, or acknowledge meaningful progress. It means the sequence matters. Action first, recognition after, not as a mechanical reward system, but as an honest acknowledgement that you showed up when it would have been easier not to. That acknowledgement, given to yourself privately without performance, is one of the most powerful motivational forces available to a human being, because it comes from the only source whose judgment you cannot fool, your own. Part 4. The identity beneath the action. Everything we have discussed so far is practical. Techniques, tools, practices, but underneath all of it is something deeper, something that determines whether these practices stick or dissolve after a week of good intentions. The Stoics did not primarily think of themselves as people who used techniques to behave better. They thought of themselves as people who were committed to a particular kind of character. The practices were expressions of that character, not constructions of it. Discipline was not something they did, it was something they were becoming. The question is not, how do I make myself take action today? The question is, who am I deciding to be? Because the person who consistently takes action when it is hard, who begins before they feel ready, who moves the first handful of dirt, that person is not someone who uses the right technique. That person has a different relationship with themselves. They have built a track record of doing what they said they would do, and that track record is the foundation on which real discipline stands. Epictetus taught that everything external, circumstances, conditions, other people's opinions, was outside his students' control. Everything internal, their judgments, their responses, their choices, was completely within it. And within that interior space, a person could become whoever they decided to become, not by wishing, not by planning, by choosing, day after day, to act in accordance with the person they intended to be. You are not fixed. The version of you that procrastinates, that defers, that waits for a feeling that never comes, that is not who you are. That is who you have practiced being, and practice can be changed. Identity is not destiny. It is a series of choices compounded over time that creates a pattern, and patterns can be interrupted. New ones can be built, not dramatically, not overnight, but through the accumulation of small acts of self-loyalty that, over time, become the evidence of a completely different person. Every time you begin when you do not feel like it, that is a vote. Every time you stay with the work when the urge to stop is loud, that is a vote. Every 5 minutes you honor, every task you divide and complete, every morning you show up for what you said mattered, all of it is voting for the person you are becoming, not the person you were, the person you are choosing to be, one decision at a time. Before we close today, I want to stay here for one more moment, because everything we have covered, the nature of procrastination, the impossibility of waiting for motivation, the 5 tools, the identity that underlies all of it, it all points to a single truth. And I want to name it as clearly as I can. The obstacle you feel right now, the resistance, the inertia, the voice that says not yet, that is not a sign that you are not ready. It is a sign that the thing you are avoiding actually matters, and things that matter are exactly the things worth moving toward, regardless of how it feels to move. The truth the Stoics knew. Marcus Aurelius did not feel like being emperor every morning. Seneca did not feel like writing every day. Epictetus did not feel like teaching from a position of loss and limitation. None of them waited until they did. They acted because the moment demanded it, because time, as Seneca reminded himself, was never coming back, because the person they had chosen to be showed up, regardless of how the circumstances felt. And in showing up, in doing the thing before it felt easy, they became the people we still study, 2,000 years later, for guidance on how to live. You do not need to feel ready. You do not need better conditions. You do not need to resolve the doubt before you begin. You need to begin right now with what you have, in the circumstances that exist today, not the ones you are waiting for. These ones. 5 minutes, 1 step, 1 small piece of the work, done now, with full attention. That is the entire practice. And it is enough, because that 1 step taken today is the beginning of a pattern, and that pattern, sustained over time, is the architecture of a completely different life. The life you keep saying you want is on the other side of the thing you keep putting off, not after it. On the other side of it, the discomfort of action is the door, and the door opens from the inside. Open it. If something inside you shifted today, if this gave you the framework to finally understand what has been keeping you stuck, then I want you to know that this is exactly the foundation of the Master Your Mind program. Inside, you will find the complete system for building the kind of self-discipline that does not rely on motivation, does not collapse under pressure, and does not need ideal conditions to function. It is built for real life, for the days when you do not feel like it, for the moments when the resistance is loudest, for the person who is done waiting and is ready to actually move. The link is in the description. If you are ready, it is there. And if this message resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and stay committed to the path of self-mastery. Every single day on Master Your Mind, we bring you the ancient wisdom that builds stronger, wiser, more unshakable human beings. This is not passive viewing. This is training. I will see you in the next video.